Good morning, everyone. Very pleased to have this opportunity to talk to you. My name is Rajagopal. I am a palliative care doctor. I chair the organization by name PALLIATIVE India. I also direct the Trivandrum Institute of Palliative Sciences, which is a WHO collaborating center for training and policy on access to pain relief. Our headquarters is in Trivandrum, Kerala. I am proud to be giving the opening session, which is the first of a series of webinars on the relevance of palliative care in COVID-19. What I would like to do now is to introduce the concept of palliative care. From there, take you on to its relevance in COVID-19, identify the elements of suffering in COVID-19, and make a brief overview of how those elements of suffering can be overcome. So by learning this, a COVID treating doctor is able to take away a significant chunk of suffering from the community in the coming weeks and coming months. Thank you very much for being with us today. On the screen, now you see the learning objectives that we have for this session. Often there are misconceptions about palliative care, and what we will do is to discuss what exactly is palliative care and what it is not. Also, we learn about the elements of suffering, namely the physical suffering, the symptoms, the psychological, social, and spiritual suffering that goes along with that. And we'll see how they can be managed. We'll have an overview today, going down to the details of each element and its treatment in the coming sessions. We will also understand the relevance of appropriate end of life care, how we care for the dying person, how we reduce the suffering for him or her and for the family, and how they are at risk of serious pathological grief, and how we can relieve that at least up to an extent. I would request all of you to download this ebook, which is available for free download. We recommend that you also download the PALLICARE app, which will help with symptom control. That is not COVID specific, palliative care for any setting. But the ebook is COVID-19 specific, created by PALLICOVID Kerala, working with PALLIATIVE India. PALLICOVID Kerala being a group of palliative care experts who got together specifically to reduce the suffering associated with COVID. I said we'll start by understanding what palliative care is. The official definition by World Health Organization is 18 years old. That is not the whole definition, that's pretty long. But the crux of it is that palliative care attempts to improve quality of life of a patient with life-threatening disease and the family. While the conventional medical system concentrates on diseases, which is important, along with that, palliative care also concentrates on the quality of life and recognizes that the family is suffering with the patient and tries to alleviate much of the suffering. Well, the term life-threatening is often found to be misleading because many people take that term to mean something that limits the length of life. So, the way the sentence is defined, some people understand it to mean only those people who are about to die. There's no problem if you take life in the larger sense as not just existence, but also something that involves some enjoyment of life and some contribution to the society. If you take it in that broader sense, that's okay. But a phrase used by the Lancet Commission for Global Access to Palliative Care in 2018 brought out this phrase of serious health-related suffering. The word suffering also appears in the full definition of WHO. So what we attempt to do in palliative care is to reduce suffering. As we are treating the disease, as we are treating the organs, the heart, the lungs, the liver, the kidney, we also take the whole person into consideration and try to reduce their suffering. This is palliative care. Would you like to reflect on that for a moment? Because serious health-related suffering need not be at the end of life. If you have a serious illness, when the diagnosis is disclosed to you, that could be a time of major suffering. And palliative care principles have to be applied right there. I don't mean that every person with every disease has to be referred to a palliative care specialist. Rather, what I mean is that every healthcare provider, a medical social worker, a pharmacist, a nurse, a doctor, has to understand the fundamental principles and have to incorporate the principles so that every element of suffering is relieved as much as possible. Now you see how that becomes relevant to COVID. COVID-19 is sheer suffering. You and I are already suffering from, wondering what's going to happen next week, next month. What would the world be like in the month of June or July? We don't know. We can possibly be optimists and look at the good things, or we can be pessimists and look at horrendous possibilities. And what will the world be like next year? So, all these fears are also a part of the suffering associated with COVID-19. And before we go into those elements of suffering, let's have it clearly understood. Palliative care is not only for cancer. There should be no discrimination in the name of a diagnosis. Palliative care is not only for the dying. As recommended by the World Health Assembly in 2014, I have given the reference for this at the end of the presentation. So as the World Health Assembly, which is the decision-making body of World Health Organization, came out with this resolution asking all countries in the world to integrate palliative care in all healthcare across the continuum of the disease from the beginning to the end. So that is clear, I suppose. It's not only for some diseases, it's for any health-related suffering. It's not only for one part of the disease trajectory, not only for the dying, it's for all suffering across the continuum of the disease. And thirdly, remember, the whole family suffers. Of those who are listening to me now, I would make a guess that at least 1/3 of all would have gone through this experience of dealing with a serious illness in one's own family. And every one of them would understand that with the patient, the whole family is suffering. So, with that in the background, let us talk about why palliative care becomes particularly important in COVID-19. First, the suffering is concentrated into a short period of time. There's no time for you to reflect and come to terms with what's happening. You get a cough. Tomorrow you are diagnosed to have COVID-19. You have read and heard and talked about it, and you fear the worst. And all of a sudden, you are whisked away from the family with the feeling that you may not ever see them again because you are in isolation. At my age, I would particularly wonder, okay, I am 72. I am not likely to come out of this alive, or my chances are poor. And particularly those with comorbidities, the diabetics, those with heart, lung, liver, or kidney disease, they would have a far less chance than even I to come out of it alive. And when you know that this is true, the extent of suffering becomes clear. Who would want to be taken away and isolated from the patient, from the family all of a sudden? And both are suffering. The patient is suffering, the family member is suffering. Because for most of us, what connects us to this world most is the family. And being taken away is horrendous suffering. One of the problems is that all the caregivers would be wearing personal protection equipment. Now, if I am in agony, somebody laying a hand on that hand, looking at me with compassion, that matters. It's a great relief to feel that, okay, in this huge building, amidst all these machines, somebody cares. But that is made very difficult in COVID-19 because everybody is clothed, masked, and wearing goggles. How is empathy to be addressed except through the softness in your voice? So this is part of the problem, and always there are ethical dilemmas for the care team and for the family. If I am your patient with COVID-19 and I developed respiratory distress, what would you do to me? If my oxygen saturation is falling and oxygen inhalation is not restoring it to normal, are you going to push a tube down my throat, connect me to a ventilator? If you do, you may be depriving that ventilator for a young man who has a good chance of survival, whereas I have a very poor chance of survival. What's the right thing? Would you deny me that ventilator? My own personal view about that ventilator, I'll come to you later, but would you deny me that ventilator because I am old? These are ethical dilemmas that we'll have to deal with. So these are a few things that we'll talk about as we go on in this series of webinars. Now, specifically for the patient, the elements of suffering can be encapsulated into those four circles. Partly it's physical, the symptoms, we'll come to that, the common symptoms, which can be quite intense. To a large extent, it is social, the isolation and the separation from the family, the emotional fear, anxiety, depression, guilt to a large extent. Knowing that if I had stayed home, my family would not be going through this so hard. And the spiritual distress, mainly feeling disconnected with the world. For a lot of people, it's God and faith that connect people to the world, but not for everybody. Whatever is that connection is lost. The person with intense faith may sometimes wonder, why did my God reject me? And with that thought comes that disconnection, at least temporarily, but that's intense suffering. It's also about lack of meaning. And at some point, I start thinking, oh, but what's the point? I'm going to die. Why should I suffer for the next 5 days? I wish I were dead now. Oh God, I don't even have the strength to kill myself. What horrendous state is this? And that is also spiritual suffering. Suffering in relation to disconnection from the universe and also in relation to loss of meaning and purpose of life. If you notice that diagram, you will see that each circle encroaches onto the other. Every suffering causes the other kind of suffering. The intense muscle pain would cause all the others. Anger at the professionals around you, so that people don't feel inclined to look after you anymore. The sadness, the spiritual anguish. So each will cause the others, and we all know that the mind has a great effect on the body. Your social, emotional, and spiritual suffering is enough to cause several kinds of physical suffering, including headache and more breathlessness and cough and several things. So these are the various elements of suffering for the person. And remember, all of them could be true for the family member also. Specifically about the symptoms, maybe some things where doctors and nurses are able to do more. And also important in another way, because if you have intense physical symptoms, then psychological support or spiritual support becomes very difficult, because symptoms can be all encompassing and overpowering. Fever and myalgia, do you bother much about it? We have all got a viral infection sometime or other. We have all had fever and muscle pains. Does that matter much? We hear and read that the pain and suffering can be horrendous in COVID-19. Even yesterday, I forget the name, I was listening to that, I was reading that description by a virologist who had earlier worked with many humanitarian tragedies, including Ebola, who came out of COVID-19, and he said, every hair was in pain. I couldn't understand it. It was not only my head, my hairs were paining. I can't even imagine what that feels like. Cough, we all cough. I coughed in between this session. What does it matter? Does it matter much? If the cough is incessant, if you have that irritation making you cough all the time, at some point it becomes totally unbearable. Secretions happening all the time and breathlessness. In any disease, breathlessness can be one of the most horrendous symptoms. The feeling that I won't be able to take air is terrible. And therefore, that needs to be aggressively treated. And unfortunately, COVID-19 often seems to be associated with restlessness. Restlessness can be intense suffering. Delirium, no longer being able to be cognitively okay, that can be very difficult to bear, because it can be associated with various thoughts and fears and hallucinations also, so that the suffering can be intense. And very often people get agitated, and then you have to restrain them chemically. Physical restraint is poor. Being tied up, that's no way to die or live. So these are common symptoms which will need to be addressed. And as we proceed with this series of webinars, we'll be dealing with all of them. If you think of some event in your own life, maybe not everybody has had that intense thing where your very existence was challenged. Or it need not be that intense thing. Maybe something that was detrimental as failure in an examination, losing the job that you always wanted, the dream job. You were almost there. At the final interview, you were discarded. Many of these emotions would be familiar to you if you think of that time. Okay, maybe not as much a fear in that context, but even that. Will I ever get a good job? What's my life going to be? If only I had put in that 10% extra effort, if I had walked that extra mile during my studies, maybe I could have done this. Anger, very common. You all have experienced it, or almost all of you, except the one or two sanely people that may be there in the group. It happens to me all the time. If I have a headache, if I have a bit of sinusitis, if I'm just tired, I'm irritable. I don't show it to the people in my office. I try to contain myself. I try to behave as normally as possible. But when I go home and I'm in my safe environment with the loved ones, then it all comes out. The headache means that the child puts on some music and you snap at them, stop that music. This is normal for all human beings. And here, in this context, when the anger is really at God or against coronavirus, who are not available for you to shout at, where does it get spent? The only person available near you is the nurse or the doctor. So you snap at them. Worsens the social relationship within the intensive care unit. Worsens suffering for the person and for the caregiver. The anxiety. The depression. Only those who have gone through clinical depression will ever understand how horrible that experience can be. Clinical depression is not just feeling sad, it's much more than that, like one person losing the ability to control one's own mind. And anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief is grief over what you may lose. Starts right from the beginning. Even the person who recovers completely has gone through that period of grief. Am I going to die? Will I ever see my family again? They are grieving for the world that they may lose. All these are common emotional factors that challenge quality of life. Similarly, the social issues, separation from the family, isolation, lots of unfinished business. The person thinks, oh, I always meant to make a will. I never got around to it. And now the family doesn't know anything about my finances. They don't even know where my accounts are. And will my children fight over the property? And unfortunately, we have seen how society may stigmatize someone just because somebody has taken a flight and is now quarantined. We have seen how the apartment associations have denied them even basic facilities. That kind of discrimination is sad and is most probably due to poor awareness and financial worries for a lot of people at the end of life. are major issues to be dealt with. And when we say spiritual factors, we don't necessarily mean only things that are associated with God or religion. It may be just the thought, why me? Why did this happen to me? I have lived a good life. I have never harmed anyone. Why did this happen to me? And just rituals being denied. Like somebody for whom the last communion is very important by his or her belief system, being denied last communion in the isolation room can be such intense suffering. And people get disconnected from everything that is familiar to them. This is not my world. What has happened to my world? And as I said earlier, you lose meaning of life. There's no meaning in continuing to live. I wish I were dead. And there's nothing to be done anyway. And the thought that you're not leaving behind something, being able to say a final goodbye means a lot. Being able to say, I'm going, I love you, farewell to a loved one matters. And just losing the opportunity to all that, to leave something behind for them, that's also intense spiritual suffering. And unfortunately, the medical system today generally does not do much about these various kinds of suffering. Not giving adequate symptom control and not giving attention to psychosocial spiritual issues. But that's not all. Unfortunately, very frequently, the medical system worsens suffering. At the end of this presentation, you will see that I have given some references. One of them is a publication made on that came out on the 23rd of April from the data from 12 New York hospitals, which showed that out of 320 people in whom there was a natural conclusion of the disease process, either in terms of discharge from hospital or death. Out of 320 people subjected to artificial ventilation, only 11.9%, only 11.9% of people had survived. 88.1% of people on ventilator had died. And of these, if you break it up into age groups, the death rate was even higher among the elderly. So somebody of my age or even older with extensive lung damage from COVID-19 being connected to a ventilator is prolongation of the dying process, prolongation of the agony of an endotracheal tube in the most sensitive part of the body, and the agony of a suction catheter pushed deep into your respiratory tract every half an hour, unable to move, being immobilized. Even if sedation is given, it is still suffering. It is agonizing suffering. So, what am I saying? The medical system, unless primed with palliative care knowledge, may deny people of comfort and actually may worsen suffering by inappropriate, aggressive life support measures at the end of life. So, considering that only 11.9% of people with on ventilators are likely to survive, what would be the best kind of care for this person at the end of life? What would be ethically right? This is something that we need to think about. To decide on that, we need to go back to the primary duty of care of a doctor. Duty of care of a doctor is not legally spelled out in Indian law. In some countries it is. But this, I have noted the reference, you will find it at the end of the presentation. This document from Indian Council of Medical Research from 2008 spells out many ethical responsibilities of the doctor. And it makes this statement: the duty of a doctor is to alleviate suffering. That is not what you were taught in medical school or nursing school. You were taught to prevent, diagnose, and treat diseases. Suffering was not discussed, though it has been accepted for a long time that that's our primary responsibility, to alleviate suffering. Our duty of care is to cure sometimes, relieve often, and to comfort always. We have talked about that from the 14th century. And ICMR adds, there exist no exceptions to this rule. The rule that our duty of care is to alleviate suffering, it is to cure sometimes, relieve often, and to comfort always, stands in any medical management. So if we accept this, what do we do? Doctors, nurses, whoever is listening to me, if you happen to be treating me, if I get COVID-19, this is what I would like you to do. I would like a triage team in the hospital. I don't think it should be the same team who would be treating me. Somebody who will be able to make an objective assessment of my disease state and my state of health, including my comorbidities, and making a recommendation. And then the treating team being honest with me. If somebody asks me, if the doctor asks me, I see that you appear stressed. Are you scared? Do you have questions? And I may say, am I going to die? What would you say? You know that I am most likely to die in that situation. Will you say, oh, of course not, you are going to be okay? That might be very cruel, because then that will mean that you'll be inflicting more suffering on me. Instead of that, during one of the sessions, we'll talk about how that communication is to be handled. If you listen to my fears, find out what my state of mind is. And if I say, doctor, please be honest with me, am I going to die? You may say, one can never be sure, but it appears from your current status that your chance of recovery may not be very good. Doctors and nurses, I'll appreciate that, because you are being honest with me. You will then not be inflicting unnecessary treatment on me. Instead, you will be helping me to take rational decisions. I may say, look, if I am going, I would like to speak to my family once more. Can you please get them on the phone for me? That one phone call for me at that time would be 100,000 times more important and more useful than your ventilator. But that may not be my decision. I may say, even if I have 1% chance, I want to risk it. Do whatever you want to. Try to get cure me. Well, we know from experience is that the person who says that kind of thing is rare. The vast majority of people, once given truth with compassion and honesty, may take some time to make decisions. But after 6 hours, they may say, just relieve my breathlessness. Let me go in peace. Please tell my family that I love them, that I'm sorry that I brought this suffering to them. And then you may be able to allow me to go with some peace. This shared decision making, after that process of triage where my condition is assessed, where the treating team takes a decision together with me, with maybe just telephonic communication with the family, helping them also to take a wise decision. At the same time, giving me symptom control focused on my comfort. That will be the kind of treatment that I would want. That would be the kind of treatment that majority of people would want if communication is started early enough, if it is done with compassion, and if I get some time to take those decisions. And before I wind up, let me request everyone not to forget my family. They are suffering. They are suffering intensely. They'll be suffering because they are losing me, but also because they have to get back to life without me, where I have had no time to prepare. Can we not have volunteers or social workers in COVID treating teams just to make phone calls? Maybe to facilitate an occasional video chat between the patient. That final farewell, for me, that is desperately important. That one chance to see my grandchildren again, to see my family again. That's more important than anybody can think when you are young. So, facilitating those conversations helps me as the patient, helps my family with the process of grieving and bereavement. That telephone call or that video call will help them to get into some kind of acceptance and prevent pathological grief, the kind of grief that may result in intense depression or clinical anxiety state or post-traumatic stress disorder. And when we say all this, particularly remember children, the adolescent, the teenager, or a small child also will sense the loss. And when they are unable to express it like an adult, it can cause serious behavioral disorders. Children need honesty. Children need help with coming to terms. So, over this period of time, I have talked about what palliative care is, that it is essentially treatment of suffering, serious health related suffering. We have talked about the various elements of it: physical, including symptoms, social, emotional, and spiritual, and about what we can do for them. Please remember that this is only an introduction. Each element of this will be dealt with in some detail in the subsequent sessions. I'm glad I had the opportunity to talk about this important subject with you. Thank you very much for listening to me.